What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and after like 2 or 3 months of delays, we are here with the end of Ultimate Spider-Man. Marvel finally released it. So, what this does is this picks up right where issue number 23 left off, the fight between Kingpin and Spider-Man, the final fight, along with Spider-Man's son, Richard Parker, who is basically Venom by all standards of measurement, and Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat. So, focusing on Spider-Man first, this has Mr. Negative, right? And he says, I have to give him some credit. This is how a man should die. Should I release him, Fisk? Free his mind. After all, doesn't he deserve to die with the honor of being allowed to fight back? And this is probably one of the dopest speeches that I've ever heard from Kingpin. And there's a couple of them in the comic, right? Because his response to this question from Mr. Negative is no. And he says, everywhere I go, I am surrounded by people trying to tear me down. I have no interest in a fair fight or grand gestures of respect. I will not submit to the slow, soft defeat of having mercy for the fallen. I want my enemies dead and all scores settled. Now, this is classic Kingpin, right? This is Kingpin as we love him and as we know him, because at the end of the day, he's just a man. But when it comes down to it, this guy is a hoss. Now, there is a caveat to Kingpin as he exists in the Ultimate Universe, and it is something that we'll talk about as we get further into this. But in response to that statement, Mr. Negative just says very well, do not fight, Mr. Parker, do not fight. Now, here's a funny thing. There's an undercurrent of a statement here, because in that moment, Spider-Man just says, yeah, I heard you, don't fight, right? And he says, this is me definitely not fighting, just lovingly moving you from one place to another. There's a workaround here, right? Of course, he immediately takes out Mr. Negative, right? Basically just webs up his mouth so he can't talk anymore. I mean, having the ability to dominate the wills of others, it requires Mr. Negative to speak. Then he throws him in the path of the Kingpin, who just clocks this guy and sends him down to the ground. Now, he's not dead, right? But he knocks this guy out cold with one hit. And so that's where Peter just says, so like I was saying, let's end this, right? Because this is the Godfather, right? When Marco Corleone settles all family business, right? Luca Brasi, Barzini, right? Strachey, everybody, Mo Green, the whole 9 yards, they're all getting taken out, except in this instance, it's all just Kingpin. But then you switch back over to Felicia Hardy and to Richard Parker. Now, lest we forget, right? Richard Parker essentially was given a device by Dr. Octopus that would essentially allow it to be hooked up to the vault within the city that feeds into the Maker's database, right? One of the things that we've learned here is that it's kind of an all roads lead to Rome type thing, which is to say there's all these information nodes that exist throughout the world, but they all go to the same location. So if you can affect one, you affect the main database. The whole idea behind this device is to actually wipe all knowledge of the Parker family from the Maker's database, right? Any information on them, what they look like, where they do or do not work, who they're associated with, the whole 9 yards. So as far as that information database is concerned, they don't exist. So that's why Richard and Felicia are here. Now, the cool thing about this is what they end up learning is when they show up here, there's all kinds of security systems within this vault because they're in the same building that Peter's fighting Kingpin at. But what's crazy is that once the security systems start activating, they kind of start to take on a symbiote form. Now, some of you guys called this in the last video that we did, and I'm not spoiling anything until we get to it, but those of you guys who called it and you know what I'm talking about, you were right. You were 100% right about what's going on here. Having said that, for those of you guys who didn't call it, here's what I mean. So as they're making their way through here, right, Felicia says, we've got to find some way to get free of this stuff. And that's where Parker just says, trusty superhero suit, I think that's your cue. And the Venom suit manifests, right? And it says, as I told you earlier, this substance is extremely complex and highly adaptable. But good news, I am more complex and more adaptable. And basically starts breaking free of the substance, giving Felicia Hardy the room she needs to get to the vault access point and plug the device in. And so that's why she says, buy me a little bit of time. And that's exactly what happens, right? The Venom symbiote just starts encasing all this goo and substance and whatnot into its own tendrils, right? So it's literally housed in a kind of egg of sorts. And at the very least, it gives her moments. But when I say moments, I mean exactly that, because she says, this is doable, right? I can 100% do this, because she's the daughter of probably the greatest thief in the world, which makes her a prodigious thief herself. But she says, it's gonna take me a minute. And so that's where Richard says, this is working. You should be fine. And then he says, oh no, right? Some slipped through. You have to look out. And then it goes for Felicia Hardy. And when that happens, Venom ends up going after that bit of a substance and just says, Richard, we might have a problem. And Richard's like, what is it? And Venom tells him the defense matrix is digging around in my code. It's changing, evolving, becoming more like us. And it turns into anti-venom, which is amazing. A lot of you guys called it. In the last video that you did, a lot of you guys were just like, okay, so it's a white substance that's very similar to venom, anti-venom. Like you guys, like in the comment section, you guys were blowing that up. And I was hoping it was true, and it is true. Congratulations, you guys. You nailed it. So at that point, you jump back to Kingpin and Spider-Man, right? And Kingpin, again, continues on with this amazing monologue. It's kind of phenomenal the way that it happens. As he says, it's truly something, isn't it? When the great Darwinian test of survival meets the undying confidence of youth, the children accomplish so much because they don't know any better, but only if they survive. And he says, me, I'll be betting on technology and the future instead of humanity this time. I just don't see your son and the traitor making it through this one. And that's where Spider-Man's like, do you want to bet? Right? And Kingpin says, I do want to bet on this, for I am wagering everything on sons and fathers dying today. What are you betting? And so that's where Peter pulls this device out of his pocket. And then you jump back to a conversation that he had with Dr. Octopus. And Octopus says, right, this device is something quite remarkable. We think that the biotech Kingpin has been running through his body, we believe that those are an upgraded version of the same enhancements the bullseyes have. And this can deactivate it, or at least make it inert, but the end state remains the same, a depowered Kingpin. Now that's one of the things to know that we've kind of figured out over time in the Ultimate Spider-Man line, that in the main Marvel universe, because it's flights of fancy and you can just kind of get away with that stuff, Kingpin is just cracked, right? He's just clearly taking vitamin S. This dude's absolutely roided out. He's just gigantic, right? But in the Ultimate universe, it's a far more grounded reality. So just presenting a guy with no enhancements whatsoever that has that level of strength doesn't quite work, right? That dog doesn't really bark for this environment. So the enhancements he has have been augmenting his strength. The Bullseyes had it to a degree, which is what made them such a prodigious fighting force on behalf of Kingpin. But at the end of the day, Spider-Man asked the question, how do you know that this works? And that's where Dr. Octopus tells him, we tried it, experimented thoroughly on a bullseye. And Peter's initially kind of taken aback by this, like, you're experimenting on people. But the reality here is there are much bigger fish to fry and far more important things to concern himself with than what would kind of be unethical experiments regarding villains, right? Now, it's not a good thing to do, but at this moment, the Maker and his forces are enemy number one. And so what this does is it leads to the Green Goblin saying, do not worry about that, Pete. The point is, next time we face Kingpin, we have a way to level the playing field. And so Peter's just like, cool. The funny thing about this is that once he brandishes this syringe and goes in for the hit, Kingpin cracks him across the face and knocks the thing across the room. And that's when he goes into another amazing monologue, right? And he says, I have to tell you, this is my favorite part. Most men in my position would be annoyed at their lessers refusing to surrender. They'd say, don't you know your place? Don't you understand the difference between someone like me and someone like you? Why won't you just accept your lot in life? But not me. I love this. The final death of hope, the crushing of dreams, the surrender to the weight of living in this unfair world. And he says, even the very end of your entire bloodline and all of it by my hand. And so at that point, you jump back to Anti-Venom and Venom, these two guys going at it. Now, of course, this ends fairly quickly, relatively speaking, which is to say, Venom bites the head off Anti-Venom. But again, there is more of this substance. And so it's not simply just fighting a person who takes on the form of Anti-Venom. No. It's fighting an army of these things. They keep manifesting from this substance over and over and over again. So now Venom is distracted, but then he also has to contend with making sure that Richard Parker and Felicia Hardy are protected. kid. And so that's why Felicia, fiddling with this whole thing, just says almost there. And Richard tells him, right, there's more of them. But that's where Venom says, the goo is them, Richard. And I now suspect that almost the entirety of the vault structure is nanotech. We either need to make a run for it, or we have to get that device hooked up so that we all become invisible to the system. My directive is that I cannot risk you being harmed. So I think we should run. But keep in mind, while the Venom symbiote cannot allow for Richard to be harmed, it also kind of has to follow Richard's directions to a degree, but there are limits. If Richard throws himself into a situation that is guaranteed to get him killed, the Venom symbiote will get him out of there. So the reality is that Richard is on borrowed time, whether he knows it or not. But thankfully, Felicia opens the vault. And so that's where Venom asks the question, what do you want to do, Richard? And so Richard says, this means saving Mom, Dad, May, so it's absolutely worth the risk. We go for it. Now, this entire fight has been shown to Peter from Kingpin, right? And so Peter is hearing this conversation between Richard and Venom, and he realizes his son is on a collision course to quite literally and most likely sacrifice his life in order to protect the family. Now, we don't know if that's going to happen, but from Peter's perspective, it looks like it will. And so that's where Kingpin tells him, I want to make you a promise, Spider-Man, one I swear to keep. When I bury you and your son's bodies, I will do so in unmarked graves on the opposite ends of this earth, apart forever, just like how you died. It's one of the coldest statements that I think I've ever heard. Hickman is amazing when it comes to writing villains in positions of power. My God, man, like this guy, there's no one like him. And so that's when you switch back over to J. Jonah Jameson and Uncle Ben. Because one of the things to keep in mind, if you're just seeing this for the first time or you're getting caught up and you've forgotten, that sure, right, of course, they effectively abandoned the Daily Bugle because it became the propaganda piece of Kingpin, right, promoting his agenda within the city of New York and ignoring facts by all standards of measurement. And so what's been happening throughout all of this is that Richard Parker and J. Jonah Jameson, with information they had gleaned from what had been going on from Kingpin all the way up to the Maker, have been dumping this information out there in broadcast bursts because they can only do it for a period of time before the signal gets traced. So now they're on to the third package and the last one. And that's where it says, it's hard hearing that this world is not what you believed it was. Some people will deny it until the day they die. They do not have the ears to hear it. But if you can, you should listen. Because the reality is that all the power that Kingpin has is an illusion. This is the allegory of Plato's cave. You guys know I love bringing this up, but it's the allegory of Plato's cave. If you don't know what that means, Legion did a great job of explaining it, which is very simple and basic, and I'll use it here, right? Imagine a cave where the people inside never saw the outside world. Instead, they saw shadows of that world projected on the cave wall. Now, the shadows are not real, but it's real to them. And if you were to take them out of the cave and show them the world as it truly is, they would reject it as incomprehensible. Then that's what's really going on here, right? That this broadcast is being sent out there. These people have been living in this world their entire lives, and the world they know it is the only world they understand. They don't know how it was supposed to be because they don't know the Maker went through and changed things. But Uncle Ben, J. Jonah Jameson are waking everyone up to the reality of the Maker, the Maker's council, the extreme measure of control they've had over the world, and people are starting to ally and reject the Maker and his views. So that's why statements like this, while it's not J. Jonah Jameson and Uncle Ben fighting, information is power, right? It's an incredible thing. And so the broadcast continues on, right? The very idea that one man can actually rule so many beneath him is what they want you to believe. And that is so very far from the truth. You see, they want to steal your hope. They want to sedate you with their culture, to do whatever it takes to keep you afraid and weak. But it is a lie, for it is they who live in fear. It is they who are weak, because they know one true thing. We are many and they are few. And so that's what makes this incredible, right? People allying and rallying against a common cause. In this instance, a corrupt council led by a corrupt man dominating the world from behind the scenes. Not only that, focusing on the fight between Spider-Man and Kingpin, he finally gets the injection into Wilson Fisk. But have no illusions, right? Wilson Fisk is not as capable as he was before, but it's the old allegory. Backed into a corner, people become more dangerous than they were when they were not in that corner. And so while all these guys are fighting, right, and the message continues on, all it takes to topple everything they have built is just one man. You switch over to Felicia Hardy, right, to Richard Parker, these guys just being encased by this goo, by anti-venom, essentially, right? And that's where Felicia says, it's got me, right? I cannot break free. Venom says, there's too much of it to stop. I might be able to infect and rewrite all of its core programming, Richard, but I am worried that will take too long. And even Richard says, yeah, like we do not have time for that. And so he just says, I'm going for it. And just like runs over to the device while Venom basically plays defense to protect Richard, and Felicia still needs to be rescued, right? And then you go back to the message. One man can stand up and say, no more, because Peter is incensed, right? And he is tired of all of this. But that's where he stands over Kingpin and says, you are beaten, right? This is over. But Kingpin is smiling and almost laughing the entire time. And Peter asks, right, why are you smiling? And Kingpin just says, take a look at the screen. And it shows Richard Parker running to the device to try to hook it up and delete all their information from the Maker's database. But then Peter realizes Richard's not protected. He's just by himself. And that's where Kingpin just says, you are too late. You cannot save him. And he says, you finally won, Spider-Man, and it only cost you everything. And so, of course, Peter goes running over to where Richard Parker is and arrives just in time for Richard Parker to activate the device. And at the same time, it shuts down the entirety of the security system. And when that happens, of course, him and Felicia Hardy make out, which is a long time coming. The two of them have really just kind of been smitten for each other for a little while. And so the Venom symbiote, right, just kind of shows up here and is like, you know, he saved the day, right, made us invisible to the world. And yet Peter's just like, he's still getting grounded again. Like, hey man, doesn't matter what your age is, right? Like operating as a superhero, civil disobedience is still disobedience. And when you're a teenager, that means you get grounded. Right? So the funny thing here is that in response to all of that, the message kind of continues on, right? But you have to remember one thing. When you pull down a despot, there is always another ready to take their place. Freedom is vigilance, and the battle never ends. Because what we end up getting is this momentary flash, right, where Green Goblin, Harry Osborn, is watching on as Henry Duggery shakes hands with Mysterio. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, one thing to keep in mind here is that when it comes to the Ultimate Universe, you have essentially the Maker at the top, you've got the Maker's Council, and then you have guys like Kingpin. Kingpin is more like a governor, right, for New York. He keeps an eye on this territory, but he still operates at the whims and wants of the council. Henry is a member of the council. So again, it's one of these things where, by all standards of measurement, the way that it looks, power is changing hands. And that's exactly what Kingpin says, that when he leaves the building alongside Mr. Negative, that Martin Lee says, it's hard to believe, right? I came here today to defeat and replace you. And look what happened. We both lost. And that's where Kingpin just says, we lost everything. I just received word that Duggery has decided that the city now belongs to Mysterio. We have officially both been cast aside. And initially, Martin Lee doesn't believe it, right? He believed that what he could do was somehow demonstrate that Kingpin was not an effective leader for this region, and that he himself would be put in charge instead of Kingpin, right? The grand pursuit of power. But Kingpin tells him, right, it's true. Look at this. And like when Martin Lee looks over the document, it proves the authenticity of Kingpin's words. They have been replaced. But here's the crazy thing, and this is when I say Wilson Fisk backed into a corner is far more dangerous than almost any other circumstance, because what he says next is incredible. Because where Martin Lee's pissed off about all of this, the response of Kingpin, I suppose, right? And Martin Lee is like, why aren't you furious about this? And Kingpin just says, oh, I will have my revenge, but it's been a long time since I felt this way. And Martin Lee asks him, right, what way is that? And Kingpin just says, hungry. And so Martin Lee tells him, right? He says, your empire has been exposed. You have been destroyed publicly and by the powers that be. You have nothing. You will have to start over. But the response of Kingpin, yes. Do you have any idea how many people I stepped on and stepped over the first time I climbed this mountain? I won, and then there were no more lands to conquer. And now, for the first time in years, I feel excited about what's next. The idea of losing it all and then gaining it back, the hair is standing up on my arms. I feel alive for the first time in years. And so that's what's nuts. It's because it's Kingpin at his most dangerous, because now it's rebuilding everything. But instead of just kind of rebuilding it and then having it taken away by the Maker and his council, and then just kind of becoming a governor, a regent for the city of New York, now it would be rebuilt under his control. And so we asked Mr. Negative, right, what do you think about that? And Martin Lee's just like, what do I think? And Kingpin says yes. And Martin Lee just says, I think you should jump, and like turns into his Mr. Negative form. So it starts dominating the will of Kingpin, and Kingpin does it, right? He starts doing it. And Martin Lee's just like, that's right? Stop lying to yourself. You don't have anything to live for. It's over. You want to jump. You are going to jump. So jump. And Kingpin just says no. Right? And Martin Lee's like, yes. And Kingpin says no, because his will is incredibly strong. And so he just says, not like this, and jumps off the building, but then grabs the ledge at the very last minute. And Martin Lee just says, you've got some fight in you, right? I'll give you that. But I am stronger now. And this day has been coming for a long time. I am going to cast you aside and climb my own mountain. And so where Kingpin grabs his leg, right, with his second hand, Martin Lee just says, that's it, right? Fight a little more. It just makes this sweeter. Do you have any idea how exciting this is for me? The hair is standing up on my arms. And so he just tells Wilson Fisk, let go. And when Wilson Fisk doesn't initially do it, he says, let go. Now, here's the crazy thing. When it comes to Martin Lee, you can end run his instructions. You can find ways to follow his orders while working around them at the same time, which is exactly what Kingpin does. Martin Lee said let go, so he lets go of the ledge, but his hand is still on Mr. Negative's leg, and both of them come crashing down to the ground and die. It's amazing. It's a phenomenal end, right? It's a phenomenal end. And so the next day, right, you pick up with the paper, which is basically the publication that J. Jonah Jameson and Uncle Ben are running, which, let's all be honest with ourselves, how many of you guys thought that Uncle Ben was going to die at some point in this story? Let's be honest, man. Just be truthful. I did. I thought he was going to die. But they kind of joke amongst themselves, right? So now that we've exposed everybody, can we finally retire, or are we really just going to be typing on typewriters until the day we die? And it's like, we're 100% going to do this until the day we die. But then you switch over to Harry Osborn and one of the biggest unresolved plot threads of the Ultimate Spider-Man story so far, which is Gwen Stacy. And so that's where this document being presented, right, that he asks, does this say what I think it does? And she just says, yes, Harry, it does. The city is now ours. Ours meaning Mysterio's. And so Harry asks, what happens to us? And Gwen just tells him, you and your friends, the Parkers and their various related relations, are safe. You can operate in the city with my blessing, and therefore the blessing of the Maker's hand. His shadow will protect me, and therefore you. You can tell them that. They are safe so long as they do not cross us. And Harry just asks, no, not that, us. Harry and Gwen, husband and wife. And that's when she turns into her Mysterio form. Because keep in mind, all the Mysterios were killed at the same time. The only way to survive was to combine themselves into one singular essence. And so that's why when Gwen speaks, when she transforms into Mysterio, she takes on this multi-armed form. It's everyone from the Mysterio Council operating as one cohesive unit. And that's why Mysterio says, there is no us. And it's said like 4 times, right? And in fact, Gwen, at least that part of Mysterio, says, it's the only way we could save ourselves when the explosion happened. We are all in here, a piece of each of us. I'm still in here, but just a piece of me, part of a consensus. We are all sorry, but this is just how it is. We all lost something, and now we have to make do. And that's where the Norman Osborn AI, right? Because keep in mind, that's kind of been a background theme in Harry's life. That instead of it being a voice in his head, it's literally the AI in his suit, just starts mocking him again, like it's been doing over the course of the entire run. Make do, lost something, my God, she never really knew you. Did she? If she did, she'd know that she didn't lose something. You lost everything. No surprise there, though, because this is what you are, Harry, a loser, a true-born, constant disappointment, my son. And I swear to God, if I was not already dead, the shame would kill me. And so that's where Harry gets back to where Peter Parker's at, takes off the helmet, and is like, so I'm gonna have Otto wipe the AI. Now, this is an important thing, because what it shows is that, number one, Harry never really succumbed to the influence of his father, in the same way that Norman succumbed to the Green Goblin persona within the main Marvel universe. But it also shows he's carving out his own path, and seemingly, he's not really going to become a villain in the traditional sense. But Peter asks him, right, are you sure? And Harry just says, yeah, right, it's time to put the past behind me. All of it. And so Peter just tells him, right, I am really sorry, Harry, about everything. And Harry's almost kind of dismissive, right? He's like, don't do that, right? I'm the one who should be apologizing. You needed me and I didn't help. But Peter's not unreasonable. And in fact, he tells Harry, we're friends. Friends do not keep score. Friends are there for each other when they need them. But they also understand that friends have priorities. And that's what he tells him, right? Your marriage was in jeopardy. What were you supposed to do? How unreasonable would it be for you to choose me, your friend, over your wife? So of course you went to go deal with your marriage and you went to go deal with Gwen. I can never fault you for that. And so that's where Peter just tells him, a good friend of mine once told me that with great power comes great responsibility. And where Harry asks him to kind of elaborate, Peter says, and I get it, I do, but I'm just not sure that it's an ethos that works in the world that we are living in. And Harry asks him, right, is that something that you're sure about? And Peter says, yeah, right, I think each one of us, everybody, has the great responsibility of fighting for what they believe in, great power or not. So it's kind of cool because it's not Peter rejecting that philosophy, it's Peter saying it doesn't just apply to people who have superpowers. A functioning, cohesive society is the most powerful thing in existence. An organized citizenry can take any and all comers. And so that's what Peter's pointing at here. But of course, Harry's just kind of like, this guy, right, all hippy-dippy and everything. But there's truth to the words he's saying, right? And Peter's just like, I don't really know what to tell you, man. It's just how I feel, right? It's what I genuinely believe. And so Harry tells him, well, that's a fantastic philosophical argument, pal. It really is. And to be fair, it sums you up perfectly. But I have to ask, right? There's something that I have to know. And he says, the entire time that I've known you, everything was going to hell around us, little pieces of us being torn off bit by bit, day by day, grinding us down. But you, it seems like it never phases you. You do not compromise and you never quit. You never even seem to think about not doing what you believe is right. So how do you do it, Peter? And so that's when you switch back to years ago, when Peter first found out MJ was pregnant and threatened to leave her. No, that's not true. That'd be terrible if Peter did that. If they did that, this would be character assassination, right? The world would rebel against Jonathan Hickman and Marvel. No, Peter does exactly what you would expect him to, right? He tells MJ, then I love you and we are together on this, right? You're literally having my children. Now, they're not married, but the reality here is it doesn't really matter for the two of them, right? As far as Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson are concerned, marriage is ceremonial, right? Them being married changes nothing about how much they care about each other. And so that's why MJ is kind of hesitant, right, with revealing this information, right? Because she says, this isn't really fair, right? I just dropped this on you while I've had longer to think about it. But there's a part of me that thinks I'd be a great mom. Because the reality here is that while Hickman doesn't necessarily come out and say it directly, what looks to be happening is under the current, they're kind of asking themselves the question, or at least MJ's kind of been asking herself the question, what do we do? How do we handle this, right? What does life look like in this situation that we're in? And here's what I mean, because she says, I know it's a lot, right? And it might be crazy, but I started school early. So this is my last year and I already have my job lined up. And where Peter says, it's a glorified internship, MJ, sure, like they'll probably hire you because you're going to crush it, but it's not a sure thing. And he says, look, right, I will drop out. Like I've got 2 years left at least. And Ben just won the Pulitzer for The Bugle. So I know that he can get me a job there. If you want to do this, then that seems like the right thing to do. Because this kind of sounds like they were at least potentially entertaining the idea of not keeping it. That's what this conversation looks like by all standards of measurement. Should we keep it? Should we not keep it? Are we in a position to even take care of a child? But notice this, right? Peter immediately steps forward. I will literally drop out of school and I will get a job if that's what I have to do. That's how you step up. Right? And so that's where MJ says, Peter, I don't expect you to do that. I want to be clear. I am not asking you to do anything, and I don't want you to have to do anything. And so that's where Peter asks, like, are you breaking up with me? And she's like, dear God, no. Not at all. Right? And so he's just like, I can. And she says, what? And he's like, ask you. And she's like, Peter, I wasn't trying to. And he's like, MJ, right? And he pulls her close and he says, it took me 20 minutes of knowing you to know that I loved you. It took me about a week to know that I would love you forever. And where MJ's just like, people are going to think we're crazy. Peter's like, well, that's because we are. And so MJ's just like, will you marry me? And Peter's like, that's supposed to be my line. I was going to ask that question, right? Like, you're taking my lines away from me, right? And she says, then you better catch up, Peter Parker, because I move pretty fast. And he just says, I noticed that about you. And so she asks, like, are we really doing this? And Peter says, if you want to, then I want to. And so she says, I do, but you have to promise me something, Peter. And he says, okay, right? And she says, I am pretty confident this is going to be the hardest thing that we have ever done and maybe will ever do. I am going to screw up a lot, and you are going to screw up too. There is no guidebook on how to be a parent. There's no big book of rules on how to make it work. You take it one day at a time, you hope you do your best, and that's it, right? And she says, but no matter what happens, no matter what's happening outside of our window or out there in the world, we have to be together on this. You and me against the world if need be, but always you and me. And Peter says always, no matter what. And so she's just like, so justice of the peace. And Peter's like, yeah, okay. And he says, but are we really getting married before we tell our families? And she's like, yeah, before, right? Just to avoid the recrimination and the guilt, because Peter's got some old hat members of his family, right? You're pregnant and you're not married? Like they would just lose their minds, right? Because tradition is everything. But at the end of the day, this is them solidifying that bond. Like they are in it to win it against all odds, world be damned. And so at that point, they get back to their home. Right now, they're not staying here permanently just because of the fact that there still may be some people out there who are hunting for them, looking for them, different things like that. Not only that, MJ's just like, one of the things to keep in mind is we don't have jobs. And Peter's like, well, that's the thing. So Richard told me that apparently Felicia's dad had like several $100 million, hidden away, squirreled away. And that, apparently as soon as he's ungrounded, we'll be able to get some of that money. So like, that's dope. So I guess we're not really broke anymore in any meaningful way. It's just giving money to Richard Parker's family, a Robin Hood type thing, which is actually pretty awesome. But one of the other things that goes on here is when the two of them are talking, right? She asks, how did everything go with Harry? And Peter just says, right, like he's struggling, MJ, like on the edge, which is to be expected. The guy's lost everything. And he asked how I do it, right? How it is that I'm able to just navigate the world without succumbing to his influence. And he says, I told him what I thought he wanted to hear, or maybe what he needed to hear, right? Just do the right thing no matter what and believe in something greater than yourself. And she asks, right, is that really the reason why? And he just says, I spent years thinking that I was missing something in my life. And yes, I was missing something. And yes, the gift, these powers actually were stolen from me. But when I finally did get them, I learned something more important. And you know exactly what that is, MJ. And she's like, oh, I do. I just want to hear you say it. Right? And he says something was missing, but it wasn't what mattered because I already had everything I truly wanted. I just didn't know it at the time. But now I do, because family was the most important thing, specifically a family with powers. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. This comic segues directly into Ultimate Endgame, so we'll link that video down in the playlist if you guys are interested, and I will catch you all later. Peace.